Welcome to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures, with CEO and award-winning author, Yvette Bethel. This podcast is dedicated to providing leaders with solutions to build trust, inspire authentic transformation, and improve engagement. Learn about new and tested ways you can revitalize your culture, empower people, and transform your results.
This is Yvette Bethel, and I am excited to welcome you to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Evolve challenges traditional leadership paradigms and explores modern leadership models, providing ideas you can use to transform your culture. We focus on leadership through the lens of interconnectivity, flow, and balance, exploring ideas that translate into practical applications for contemporary organizational challenges. Our topic for this episode of Evolve is building corporate soul. And to explore his book of the same name with us is author and entrepreneur Ralf Specht. Ralf is called a visionary business leader by FastCompany Press. He is the creator of the Soul System, which is a framework that aligns value-creating employee action with broader corporate strategy through shared understanding and shared purpose. He introduces a new language of success into the world of business based on his mission to make the leadership behaviors which build soul synonymous with the behaviors which build success. Ralf is a founding partner of the startup Spark 44, a global marketing communications powerhouse. He was the architect of an innovative industry-first joint venture with Jaguar Land Rover, and during his time as COO and CEO, he successfully focused on the interdependence of the creative output with employee engagement and satisfaction. His driving vision is to make soulless companies a thing of the past. Welcome, Ralf. It's a pleasure to have you join us on Evolve.
Thank you very much, Yvette. It's a pleasure to have me here. So it's great. I'm honored.
All righty. So let's just get started. I'd like to know what got you on this path. What sparked your interest in the soul of corporations? Because hardly anybody ever talks about this soul. They're not even aware of it in many cases. So tell us.
Well, actually, it was sparked by the feedback that I got from many of my fellow employees and colleagues at Spark 44 when I stepped down, because they shared with me messages that really went close to my heart. And they not only described what you would perhaps expect in such a situation, a farewell or it's been a great time working with you message. But what they actually did was they thought about the quality of corporate culture that had been built. And since I was the last of the founding partners that left the company, it was apparently a moment where people took a deep breath and said, oh, we're not so sure whether it's going to remain as it was, and what has been something very special that we haven't experienced in any other place before. So thank you very much, and kudos to you for the culture that has been built. And when I received the messages on my email and my WhatsApp, took a few days of digesting, and then I thought, well, actually, these messages are too valuable to just stay on my iPhone. And actually, there's something bigger in this, which I thought corporate soul is a very good description of what we had built. So I felt the legacy that we had built, and we is what I actually say, we all founders and many others in the company, was not to build a company from scratch up to 1,200 people and 19 offices worldwide, but actually to build a company with soul.
So what exactly is a company with soul? What is its purpose?
Well, a company with soul is first and foremost clear about its purpose. And while many companies say they are clear about their purpose, when you ask their employees, many of those usually say, well, we don't even know our purpose or the purpose of the firm. Not are we clear what it means in every day. And so the purpose is at the heart of what I define corporate soul and the soul system framework that I have created. When you look at it from through some research that has happened, there's a study from EY which is called the business case for purpose, and that gives a few hints to why it is important. It says an organization with shared purpose will have employee satisfaction, and 89% of all leaders in those companies agree to it. When you then ask the employees and ask the question, is your organization's strategy reflective of your sense of purpose? The answer is 50% only say yes.
Wow.
So you see the discrepancy between the 89 and the 50. So that's why in my model, when I talk about purpose, I always talk about shared purpose. Shared purpose to me has two components. One is shared in the sense of the leadership team is behind it. It fully agrees and is aligned with it, but shared also in terms of everybody in the company understands what it is, what it means, and what it means to them. And that's the first step to building corporate soul. The second step, actually, because to me, purpose is a means to an end. It's not the end. Very often in the discussion about purpose, it feels like purpose is the thing. It's important, but it's only here to achieve something bigger, which to me is corporate soul. And the second level, so we had shared purpose. Second level is what I call shared understanding. So you see the pattern, the word shared plays a role here. And with understanding, I look at four elements of corporate strategy. I look at the typical ones like vision, mission, values. Everybody looks at those, but there's a fourth one that I think very often gets overlooked, which to me is spirit. And spirit, in my view, is the intended culture the place is supposed to have. And that might be very different from real culture, but if you don't spend a moment and contemplate about what spirit your company is supposed to bring to the table, you might not get the culture you want. So being clear about the vision, being clear about the mission, and being clear about the values and the spirit defines the second layer of the soul system. Now, when you got these two, the shared purpose and the shared understanding, you basically got the theory bit sorted. Now comes the tough part, as we all know, execution. And execution is not PowerPoint. Execution is what happens every day. And so the third level of the soul system is what I call the shared behaviors. Because only if the behaviors reflect what the purpose suggests and the strategy defines, you achieve an integrity of all elements of what's happening inside a company. And that, to me, is what brings a company to a place where it can say, well, we've built corporate soul.
So in essence, it sounds like when you're building corporate soul, you need to be conscious about who you really intend to be, and not allow decision making and other processes to kind of veer you away from who you are at a soul level. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you need to understand, or you need to define who you want to be. So hence the purpose and the vision, mission, values, spirit elements are really, really critical. But we all know when you've worked in an organization, there's day-to-day realities, and colleague X does it this way, and colleague Y does it that way.
Yeah.
That in itself is not necessarily a problem, but if what colleague X does is not in line with the road that the shared purpose and the shared understanding suggests, then you might get into trouble if it gets if it becomes a consistent behavior. And so the leadership of a company has a lot of levers in their hands, and to me, one of the biggest levers that on the one hand is often taken for granted, and on the other hand very often is not considered being, or is not consciously being considered, is commitment. And commitment is actually a wonderful resource for any leadership team. Commitment is basically coming for free. If you as a leader put yourself in a position where what you're asking from your people is something that they understand, so they can find the rationale behind it, they can connect with it, and at the same time they feel strong about, so that they put the extra mile or the extra hour into it. And in order to gain commitment, I think you need 5 things. You need alignment, so it's a communication element. You got to explain where you want people to go. Hence the shared element as well. You got to be transparent about your goals. You got to make sure that everybody can understand those. And you shouldn't be too shy to ask your fellow team members to work with you on those goals. So participation is a critical element. And then obviously ownership and accountability. And the 5th piece is something that often gets forgotten, which is proper documentation, because we've all seen it in companies. There's great goals and great objectives that are being identified, but then they seem to be important when the new year starts and everybody goes like, well, this is what we want to achieve. But then when you ask people 6, 7, 8, 9 months down the line what the objective was, they've forgotten, or they're not clear about it. So documenting the goals is critical, but also documenting progress and creating visibility. And all of these elements have one thing in common. It's a very transparent process that you actually have to get on with. And the idea of these shared behaviors is actually to make sure that everybody is conscious about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And the book defines for the 3rd level of shared behaviors a number of areas where it's extremely critical that there is consistency in the behaviors. And those areas are, for instance, your hiring processes, your promotion processes, your compensation processes, but also things that have nothing to do with human resources in the first place, like which other companies are you partnering with? Is there an integrity between what you want and what they want? And can your people, your staff actually get behind that without feeling being forced? So that all of these things are very, very critical. And when you look at one aspect that's been in the discussion over the past few months everywhere across the world, which is some call it the Great Resignation. Nadella called it the Great Reshuffle, which I think is the better term. But there's one thing that is probably the root cause of that situation, which is employees don't feel that their current employer is their right employer. And McKinsey did a great study about that phenomenon, and they looked at what are the most important drivers for employees to take the decision to leave, and what do the employers believe the most important drivers for the employees are. And guess what? They're obviously not the same. So the employees, the number one issue is you want to feel valued by your organization. Number two issue is you want to feel valued by your manager. And the third one is you want to have a sense of belonging. Now, none of that actually happens in the top three scores for the employers. What they think is the root cause. So employers think we're not paying enough, or they're looking for a better job, or there might be a health issue somewhere down the line. So the only thing that both kind of agree on is the fourth point, which is a good work-life balance. That's fine, but the top three scores on the employees, valued by an organization, valued by the manager, and a sense of belonging are the critical ones. And these lead to people resigning. And if you flip it, getting those right gets you to companies with soul, because employees will feel valued, ideally by their manager, but also by the organization, and get a sense of belonging. And once you get that, you basically erase the top three reasons why people are leaving. So there is a lot of benefit to it.
You talk about soulless organizations, and you just gave a number of different statistics. From your perspective, what is the majority? Companies with soul or companies without soul, and why?
If I only knew. So when I finished writing the book and had studied lots of surveys and analysis from many well-reputed companies, I thought it was interesting to me that there are some companies that always seem to pop up in these studies. And so I thought, so let's look at two kinds of studies, actually. So on the one hand, look at studies that basically take employee feedback about the employers. And on the other hand, take studies that have a view on business performance of companies. So what we did was we actually blended those results from those studies and came up with what I call the SOUL index, which is a performance index of companies. Now, in that index, you will find a lot of companies that are well known to everyone, a lot of big companies. So very often there's an idea that companies with soul are small family type of 20 people companies. And yes, it might be much easier to build corporate soul in a small firm, but obviously the impact of building it in a large firm is significantly higher. But obviously you should aim for both. So looking at that, the top 20 companies of that soul index, of which 60% are tech firms, which is an interesting observation. And all those tech firms have basically been found between the mid-70s and the early 2000s. And they all are characterized by one thing: they did not have much change in the CEO position, right? So the average CEO tenure is like, I think 6.8 years in the US. So when you look at the tenure of the 20 CEOs of the 20 soul index companies, over the past two leaders, current CEO and previous CEO, the average is 15 years, so more than twice as much. And it would be much, much higher if Jeff Bezos wouldn't have stepped down as CEO earlier this year. So, because obviously for the average, the 1 year of his successor doesn't help much. But anyway, so you already have like twice as much of that. And at the same time, tech companies in the Silicon Valley have revolutionized a lot of working culture aspects when they started back in the 70s with Microsoft and Apple and others. And their focus on employee well-being has been significantly higher than in so-called traditional industries. Now, that's one observation, and explains why it's 60% of the top 20. But then you also have, interestingly, an interesting mix of young companies and old companies. So the oldest company in the Seoul Index is a company that was founded in 1845. Well,
Really?
that's Deloitte, right? And the second oldest company is American Express, which was 1850. So pretty close. The youngest company is Workday with 2005, and everybody else is somewhere in between. Obviously, predominantly in the 70s and 80s. So, and as I mentioned, the index is composed basically by a significant weighting of employee feedback, both in terms of employee engagement, employee satisfaction, and their recognition for or approval for the current CEO. And these three dimensions seem to give a very good proxy for what's happening inside a company. And if you blend that with business performance overall, you've got a pretty solid mix of companies. And I was very positively surprised. I mean, I did expect it was good, but I didn't expect it was that good when we were doing the initial calculation, because the Seoul Index companies, when we looked at them on a 5-year basis, delivered a return of 199% in the stock market, and the Nasdaq did 180, S&P 500 was 83, and Dow Jones was 75. So that was quite something. I think the idea of, as you mentioned earlier in my mission, to make the leadership behaviors which build so synonymous with the ones that build success, is something that is actually real. It's not an airy-fairy, nice esoteric kind of thought. It's actually reality, and some leaders get it and they do it right, and others are on the way, hopefully.
Based on your experience, when you're facilitating a company in the direction toward, realizing their corporate soul, what are some of the barriers that you typically encounter?
Well, I think the first barrier is what I just mentioned, the idea of, well, this is just a nice airy-fairy kind of thinking, and it's feel good, but we've got a real business to do here. And when you listen to those, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of research out there, and sometimes you just got to bring the research into the forefront for everyone, so that they can really understand what's happening out there. There's one piece of research from a company called OC Tenor in the US. They got a global culture index, right? And what I define as a business with soul, they define as a thriving culture, right? So they're pretty synonymous, I think. And when they look at thriving cultures, they say, well, first of all, they got a double likelihood of increasing revenues. So it makes business sense. The incidence of great work is 8 times higher, and the likelihood of having highly engaged employees is 13 times higher. And at the same time, employees in those cultures have 3 times less burnout situations, and companies are 3 times less likely to face layoffs. So if you really look at those and think, okay, is there business sense? Is there some some rationale behind looking at our soul and looking at doing some soul searching inside the company, you can only say yes, of course, of course it is, and you got to start with yourself, with the leaders. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day who was running a workshop with the leadership of a company, and he had like 13 50 plus leaders in an executive boardroom, and they were all complaining about the fact that their employees didn't show any signs of empowerment. And then he just stopped and said, okay, if your guys don't show any sense of empowerment, it just simply means that you are not empowering them. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So if you want to change that, let's start in this room. Because what is it that holds you away from empowering your people? And everybody said, well, now we need a coffee break, right? I mean, it's always difficult. I mean,
or they tell them you're empowered now, but nothing.
And that was it. Well,
it always happens.
I don't know. I'm gonna keep talking to the guy and see what happens in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. They still continue doing it, but no, seriously, I think the biggest barrier is understanding that this is actually a business enhancing activity, not just a feel good activity. And then it requires openness, and it requires the CEO or the general manager, whoever leads the company at the top, to fully embrace it, because these things only happen when the man at the top or the woman at the top is actually saying, yes, we want to do that. And there are great examples for it. I mean, one of the examples in the book is Hilton Hotels, which was in a very, very difficult shape in the early 2000s. And with the right investor and the right CEO, the company turned corners big time, and is one of the members of the Seoul Index. And I would argue, I mean, hospitality is always an interesting space in this regard, but when they went back and paying tribute to their founding belief by Conrad Hilton, which was, we are great people serving great people, and looked into how they were dealing with the great people inside the company, they felt they were not dealing so great with them. So one of the biggest things they did was actually taking their own staff seriously and giving them a lot of tools and creating an environment where they felt valued. So we're coming back to the McKinsey piece: valued by the manager, valued by the organization, and things happen, right? And but obviously that's why I call the third level shared behaviors. This is not the one moment in the year when everybody gets a fancy gadget which had a great year thank you present. This is about a lot of small steps along the way, and but it's also about steps that people recognize, which are not like incremental changes, because you always have to have like lighthouse projects in there that people can refer to and say, since we got that, something has changed, and I recognize something has changed, and I, as an employee, also need to consider whether I'm prepared to follow that change and get on the journey. So the book is not talking about something like the employees are always right and the leadership is always wrong. That's not what it is. It's about finding a proper way for the leadership to connect with the people. And one of the most impressive examples during the research for the book was the interview that I did with Adrian Hallmark. He's the CEO and chairman of Bentley Motors. And he took over the reins of the company, and the company was in in difficulties, right? So similar to Hilton, they had a commercial situation that wasn't as anybody wanted. And on top of that, they had to deal with Brexit, which also didn't help. And as if that wasn't enough, COVID hit, right? So it's a perfect whammy, a triple whammy, actually. And what Adrian did was he created an environment of clarity with all stakeholders. So he did one thing, which I said to him when he told me about that. I said, "Weren't you afraid that this would backfire big time?" He said, "Well, there is always the potential that things backfire, but actually, if you don't give trust, if you don't show trust to your people, how can you expect them to trust to you?" So what he did was the team, the executive team was clear about the shared purpose and the shared understanding of where they wanted to go. And then they brought together all 4,500 people and basically shared everything with them. Every 3 months, they had a town hall with everyone, all the 4,500, and they put everything on the slides and everything was explained. So everybody knew. And there were a lot of things on these slides that actually some journalists would have been happy to create a Big Trouble at Bentley story. But because people in the company saw the real trust that was brought towards them, they felt, well, we can't let anything leak. We basically pay back with trust and jointly get going on the action to make it happen. And one of the things that the company has always been strong at was to treat people as human beings and not just as like we got 5,000 to work on the stuff. And I think the program that he put together was really very powerful. It was introduced in the COVID situation, continuously applying a lessons learned attitude. And when he and I talked last summer about it, he was one of the things that he was very proud of was over the past 2 years since COVID started, there wasn't a single case where anybody contracted the virus inside the factory.
Interesting.
And so it said, well, from his point of view, it's the first time that I've been in a leadership role and there was a real risk that people could die. And so that was a significant moment of realization that your responsibility as a leader in a company goes significantly beyond what you usually consider, because it's a question of life and death. If you make sure that your people are safe and the working environment is safe and sound.
You do a wonderful job of weaving this all together. And one more piece that I'd like for you to weave into this is the purpose-based alignment that you talk about from the perspective of, just like the soul, people don't think about aligning purpose when they're hiring, for example. What have you done, or what have you seen that organizations do well to get that alignment between individual purpose and organizational purpose?
Organizations that, first of all, are clear about it, have an advantage here, because if I'm clear about it and my team is clear about it, the chances that they actually are clear about it when they talk to an interview candidate is higher than if they don't. And that's banal, but very often that's where the problem starts, that people are not clear. That's why the word shared is so critical in the system. Now, the there's been two discussions, right? There has been a discussion about purpose overall, and there has been a discussion about the purpose of every individual and that it should be aligned with the company. I think that goes a bit too far because, yes, it might happen every now and then that someone's personal purpose is aligned perfectly with the company's purpose. But I don't think that is necessary and is a prerequisite for great corporate culture and building corporate soul and success of the business. I think employees ideally are aware, B, understand what it means to them, and C, can see that the purpose is reflected in what the company is doing overall, whether it's in their department, whether it's with their product portfolio that they're promoting, whether it's in the partnerships that they are choosing with other companies, in the way they deal with their employees and their colleagues. All these things give very critical signs. Hence, to me, the shared behaviors are really critical.
A lot of people use the term fit to describe how they bring people in or how they appoint people to different roles. How does purpose, can you make a distinction between purpose and fit? Is there one, or what is your perspective on that?
Well, there's one chapter in the book which talks about culture fit versus culture add.
What's the second one?
Fit versus fit or add, like adding to your culture.
Oh, add. Okay.
Yes, and Netflix, who's very popular and recognized for their corporate culture and everything they've done in that space. Their HR director once said, if culture fit means I pick the right person that I would love to have a beer with after work, then that's not what we want here. I think that's pretty much what she said. And I would totally agree. This is not about
think.
Yeah. No, but I think and having a team structure with only like-minded people who all think the same is also not a very healthy structure, because you always need inspiration and input, and you need a disruptive element every now and then as well in order to push things forward and create innovations inside the company. But here's the big but. I think when you're a leader, you have to be in a position when you make the final cut on hiring someone, whether that individual is both an addition to the culture and a fit to the culture, and that's no contradiction.
Right.
I remember a situation we had to hire a managing director for an office, and that office had a lot of challenges at the time, and I had asked a few colleagues to help me with narrowing the search down and doing a few interviews, and said, well, why don't you start with filtering it down and getting to the top one or two candidates. And they did that, and so at one point I met that person that they felt was the right person, and I couldn't find any way to connect with that person because I felt that he had not fully understood what we were about. And while the team focused very much on what needs to be done, my view was, of course, that's what you need to do, but how can you bring the company forward overall? I mean, he was the supposed to be the managing director of the biggest office. And obviously, you've got a few people who've been working on that narrowed down shortlist piece, and they all look at you and you are like, well, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced yet. Then I explained to them why I wasn't convinced, and they could understand it and accept it. It was no problem. So we briefed the recruiter to actually go back one more time because we weren't there yet. And that was one of the best decisions we ever done because the person that was then hired was a rock star in terms of bringing that office to new heights and creating innovations and managing the people in a perfect world and creating world-class products. So it's always worth thinking twice whether you make an important hire and understand what you're really looking for,
right?
What the culture is, what the culture needs, and how you can build it from there. Because culture obviously is never, do you say in English, stationary? Is never
right.
It's never the same today. I mean, perhaps today and tomorrow, but not today and in 5 years. Things change, right. Things evolve, and to your point, evolve. Getting that, being conscious about the evolution that takes place in the right direction, I think is what is so important for every leader.
There's a last question for you. If you were to give our listeners one piece of advice, if they're interested in instituting or building corporate soul, what would you tell them that they need to do?
I think the piece of advice would be, when you look into this subject of corporate culture, ask yourselves a few questions. And when you're a leader, these questions are slightly different as if you're not the leader inside the company. So if you're the leader, I think the first question is, are you able to define the culture of your company in one sentence? Can you just give this one statement? This is the culture of our company. And ask yourselves and do the test whether your management team would use the same words. And very often they don't. And then you already know where the gaps are.
Yeah.
And from an employee perspective, because one person reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, well, this is all cool, but actually I'm looking for a new job. And how do I find the company soul? Which I thought was a very relevant question.
Yeah.
And, I said to her, well, that's not so easy because they don't have a stamp on the email. But do one thing, which I think is really important. Ask the company, when you get to the stage of interviews, to be allowed to talk to other people than just the hiring manager. Get an understanding, read the Glassdoor or whatever the platforms are in your country, read those platforms, the comments on those platforms well, and don't be shy to ask the question, how it works. And you will see from the response whether that is an embracing culture or thriving culture or not. And I'm curious where she lands.
Me too. With that, Ralf, I would love to thank you for joining us. Your insights will certainly help our audience to start leading or to start building a corporate soul. And please tell our audience where they can find you on the internet, you and your book, Building Corporate Soul.
Yes, so it's been my pleasure to be on the show today. And everybody who's interested in building corporate soul just finds more information on building.corporatesoul.com. And if you want to connect with me and follow me, you can do that on Twitter. The handle is just Ralf Specht. And and on LinkedIn, where it's also Ralf Specht. And because Specht is so difficult to pronounce for everyone with an American or English language accent, it's Specht. And Ralf comes with an F.
And now I'm going to be tested. This has been Yvette Bethel and Ralf Specht. And we thank you for taking the time to join us on Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures.
Thanks for listening to Evolve, Reinventing Leadership, Building Freedom Cultures. Join our vibrant network of leaders who are challenging the leadership paradigm in an innovative learning and impact network. Check out our webpage at ifbnetwork.co to learn more about and join our exciting ecosystem of high-performing leaders.